as you're the host.
Yes, I have already started recording.
That's lovely. Thank you.
Okay.
Right.
Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for joining us. We've just finished. We've got a nice group of people here. I'm pretty sure they all loved it. And any
You can say
thank you.
Thank you.
Has anyone got any questions they'd like to fire off with first, or
Comments as well.
or shall we start as the committee?
How long did it take to get all the footage?
How long did it take to get all the footage?
It took us, the whole project from research to the first screening took us almost 3 years. So the footage, actually, when we count down the days, we had like 80 days of filming. No? And we got maybe 100 hours of material, and then like 50 hours of footage, of archive footage. So yes, it's a huge amount of footage to create this 1.5 hour film. That's the hardest part of editing. Filming is something very special, not to be in contact with nature, with people like Nelly. That editing is hard. You're in front of the screen with an editor and spending month on month trying to build a narrative structure.
Follow up or any question? So,
And likewise, the editing. How long did the editing take?
so you've just said how long it took to compile the footage. How long did the editing process take afterwards? Or
it took us like 9 months, actually. Yes, because we had several cuts. So we have a rough cut of 2 hours and 30 minutes. And I got some funding to do like a proper post-production, and that gave us more time. So we spent like near 9 months editing. So most of the time when people think about what a documentary filmmaker does, they think in the trips, in being filming and traveling. But actually most of the time is spent sitting in front of the screen, writing proposals, writing emails, and editing. So the most part of the 3 years of work is meetings, mails, grants applications, and editing.
How many people in the group?
how many people were in your crew to make the film? How many people did you have?
On location, that's what I love documentary filmmaking because you have a lot of freedom. So on location, we have just 3 people in the crew, like the cameraman, the producer that was also doing the sound, and me, and a driver.
Okay.
Yes, and Nelly, that the main character that we were following. And so, but as you have seen at the final credits in the project, there were like maybe 50 people involved, because then you have to like have a sound designer, like a sound engineering, and then color grader, and a lot of people involved during several stages of the project. But on location filming, we were just 3, 4, including the driver.
Any more questions? Yeah.
Regarding safety, there was any safety protocol during the shootings? How was the process to like have you and your crew there in the middle of the conflict and still be able to keep your records with you, your cameras with you, don't get hurt?
So the question we just had was, regarding the safety of you and your crew. Like, where there was obviously some moments where it was quite tense in the filming, the standoffs. How did you sort of negotiate that, sort of the dangers that you might have faced along the way with your crew and keeping your footage and not being stopped from filming if it was a possibility?
I think the main protection for our crew was to have the support of the community. So that's key. When you need access, you need communities and people opening their houses, their memories, their hearts, and that's the best protection. But we did also have like a protocol, a security protocol, like about how to contact first when we were in dangerous situations, and we activated that in several moments of the film. So we have, we were in connection with the human rights organization in Peru, with human rights lawyers, and with journalists, and yes, with a whole like a network that will give us some protection and or that will act immediately in case we have we've been like, for instance, detained, or our footage was taken from us. So but we also have security measures, like having a copy of the footage in a different part. Even we have a copy of the footage in Europe. And this is my third film about mining conflicts in Peru. So I got some experience and a network of connections and community trust our work based on the previous experience of other films.
Any more questions from the audience? Anyone? Yeah.
And regarding ethical issues, at some point we also would see the face of some policemen or some people even go out from the mines. How was the process to pass through these ethical barriers regarding legal issues?
So it was a question about the ethical issues, like, because there were scenes that you had where you had shots of policemen, you saw their faces. How did you sort of navigate that whilst you're part of the community, but also filming authority and government? Was that an issue for you in the filming, in the process?
In terms of ethical, like we try to exclude like the most violent footage, with people like bleeding and the people that were shot. There were footage of that, but we didn't want to include that. We constructed with Nelly, that the main character, this sequence when she is talking or telling Mother Water what happened with the lives of 5 people defending the lake, and she uses this photograph to pay the tribute to them and to do like an offering of the images to the lake, instead of using the footage that was more explicit in terms of violence. And we did, in terms of ethical issues, Nelida had access to rough cuts, and we invited her like several times to our studio to watch the film, to watch the construction of the film, because it's a narrative, like we have to build a storytelling, and she gave us input. She approved the final cut, and even we had the first screen we had was with her family. And so this is the type of procedures that you follow to have a film that is validated by the protagonist and by their communities, and also to avoid like having images that could hurt instead of inspiring change.
Any more, or we've got a few committee questions if anyone doesn't want to come in? So a couple that we've sort of thought up was, you mentioned about you've got the footage, you had footage of people being shot and obviously quite badly hurt. What was the hardest part for you about making this film?
Well, making a film presents several challenges, no? And they have so to start with one of them, the creative challenge. When you find, when you're following a story and you are collecting and filming, and then you end up with 150 hours of material, that's something very sometimes you feel lost in that huge amount of footage, no? So you feel like you don't have, that you won't make any sense with that quantity of footage, no? So that's the creative challenge. Then the other is a financial challenge. Like you need money to cover your back while you're working, and you need the most expensive resource in this type of film is time. So you need to be working for 3 years in this type of film, sitting in front of an editing computer, and so you need to have the rent pay, basic or minimum salary covered for your team. And so that's also a challenge, a difficult front that you have to face. And then the other issues like security concerns, and also having access, not having construct a relationship of trust with the main protagonist. No? That's also a challenge, how to build this relation. And it has been 6 years since we complete the film, and I'm happy to know that I'm still contacted by Nelida, no? And so I could say that we're friends, and I usually help her with some of her projects. Like she has now a communication initiative to produce short films about modern water. So I helped her to apply, for instance, for a grant, and she finally got a small grant, and so she is very happy to start working in this training opportunity to produce some short clips, short videos about modern nature in Peru.
You mentioned that it was your third film. You mentioned that it was your third film about mining in Peru. What inspired you to make this film specifically?
I don't know how I ended up doing this type of films. Like, it's because mining is huge in Peru. Like, it's a main economic activity, and it's where you could find that this type of conflicts, where you have people like Nelida, that they have a very deep knowledge of a connection with Earth, with Mother Earth, Mother Water, and they are considered like ignorance, communists, extremists by the dominant media and politicians. So I felt compelled to portray them in a more respectful way, listening to what they have to say, and treating then their point of view, their way to see the world with respect, and as we did in Daughter of the Lake. And so I think that is one of the reasons to portray communities that are underrepresented in the media, in the mainstream media.
So we've only got one question left. You mentioned that you've helped her out with projects since, as you in making films of her own. But what would be one piece of advice that you would give someone who's looking to get into filmmaking, documentary making, or social change of this kind? What would be one piece of advice you could give to someone?
One piece of advice: try to I think the most important connection with the people that you want to portray, that you want to have in your film, is the human connection, and being there for them. No? Like today, these busy times, we are always looking toward mobiles and we are always in a hurry. No? So the ability to stop and be truly there for someone, to listen to someone, is something very unique. No? It's like a scarce skill, no, in this time. No? And so that's a good start. No? To start with a human level of communication, no? and then you will access to memories, to feelings, and access is something that you need to make inspiring films.
That's it. Thank you very much, Ernesto. That's all the questions we have here. I'm sure everyone will express their own gratitude. It's an honor to have you as our first screening, and thank you very much for letting us do it. And on behalf of all of us here, thank you very much. I'm sure. Round of applause.
Thanks a lot. And good luck with this initiative. I think it's very important to have a space to watch documentary films, to talk with documentary filmmakers and academics working on the subjects that are brought by films to inspire change. You know? And I'm happy to be part of Sussex community. You know, I'm teaching at the School of Film, and so I'm helping people to connect with this wonderful art of documentary filmmaking. So thanks a lot.
Thank you so much. Thank you. We'll leave you to it. We won't give you any longer. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Bye. Bye.